single dad CEO mistakenly sends his daughter to the wrong school, only to meet a young teacher. I enrolled my daughter in the wrong school by mistake. She hadn't smiled in 3 years. Not since her mother died. But that night she texted me just 4 words. I liked my teacher today. I'd built a billion-dollar medical tech empire, but in that moment, I realized I couldn't fix my daughter with money. I had to walk into that crayon-smelling classroom and meet the woman who taught her how to feel again. A mistake that changed everything. New York City doesn't forgive mistakes, especially not for a man like Daniel Ross. At 42, he was the kind of CEO who scheduled grief into 15-minute blocks. A man who built an empire from precision and numbers, yet couldn't figure out how to bring his daughter back from the silence her mother's death had left behind. Clara used to laugh like falling rain. Now at 7, she barely spoke. Her world had dimmed the day her mother's heart stopped, and nothing Daniel did, no therapist, no toy, no elite academy, had changed that. So when his assistant accidentally enrolled Keva in the wrong school, a rundown public elementary with no reputation, no prestige, Daniel was furious. Until he received a message that froze him in place. I liken my teacher today. That one sentence cracked the fortress he'd built around his grief, and for the first time in 3 years, Daniel canceled his meetings, loosened his tie, and walked into a classroom filled with paper butterflies and beanbags. What he found there wasn't just a teacher. It was the woman who would teach his daughter, and him, how to feel again. Chapter 1: The Woman Who Didn't Rush Silence. Daniel Ross had built his life on control. The precise angle of his cufflinks, the color-colored boardroom slides, the silence of an apartment where grief could be muted by polished floors and uninterrupted views of the city skyline. But nothing, no algorithm, no amount of stock options had prepared him for his daughter's silence. It wasn't just the absence of words. It was the way Keva moved like a shadow of herself. The way she avoided Myra's. The way she stared at her mother's favorite chair, as if waiting for it to breathe. So when the school secretary at Southfield Elementary buzzed him in with a warm smile, and the faint smell of crayons in the air, Daniel felt the dissonance immediately. This wasn't Hawthorne Academy. There were no marble floors, no private security, just construction paper art and a handwritten sign that read, "You don't have to be okay, you just have to feel safe." He almost turned around, but then he heard it. He saw and was steady, grounded like an oak tree in a windstorm. "But you don't have to share if you're not ready," the woman said from inside room 203. "We'll just sit with you. Sometimes that's enough." Daniel stood at the door, watching through the glass. The children sat on beanbags, some cross-legged, some fidgeting. In the center, perched on a low stool in jeans and a cardigan, was a woman with loosely tied auburn hair. She wasn't teaching. She was listening. One child admitted he missed his daughter. Another said loud noises made her stomach twist. And then Clara Jennings, though he didn't know her name yet, did something extraordinary. He didn't rush their sadness. She didn't redirect the conversation. He didn't offer praise or platitudes. Really brave to say, she whispered to the boy with the shaking hands, "You don't have to be okay today. Just here, just with us." Daniel swallowed hard, his jaw tensed. And then he saw her. Keva. Sitting in the back, upright, focused. Not slumped over, not lost in some unreachable fog. There was something flickering in her eyes, something Daniel hadn't seen in years. That night, he made her favorite pasta. He placed it in front of her without expectation, without pretense. Keva looked up, cautious. "Miss Clara let us draw what the characters felt, not just what happened in the story," she said softly. "You liked that?" Daniel froze. "Would you like to stay there at Southfield?" he asked. Keva paused, then gave the tiniest nod. And in that moment, Daniel Ross, who had led billion-dollar boardrooms and sat across from presidents, realized something far more important. He had just met the woman who would teach his daughter how to live again. And maybe, just maybe, teach him too. Chapter 2: The Girl Who Shared a Cookie. Clara Jennings never asked Keva to He never made her draw. Never forced her to smile. She simply made room. Gentle, sacred space for a little girl who hadn't felt safe in years. By Thursday, Keva had begun sitting closer during morning circle. By Friday, she had picked up a paintbrush, though she didn't use it, just held it like it might break. Clara noticed every inch of progress. So did Daniel. He came during lunch now, quietly, always staying behind the window, arms crossed, heart clenched, watching this woman, this teacher, who seemed to speak fluently in silences. What struck him wasn't her voice. It was her presence. When a child sobbed over a lost pet, Clara didn't fix it. He just sat with them. When another boy with autism panicked over the noise of the pencil sharpener, she dimmed the lights and whispered, "You're not alone, just breathe. You're safe now." Daniel had built hospitals with cutting-edge labs, but here, in room 2-3, he looked like... And Keva was waking up. He had started humming while brushing her teeth. He started sleeping through the night again. He started asking for crayons. Daniel didn't understand it, but he couldn't ignore it. That afternoon, Clara dimmed the lights and softly clapped her hands. "Connection time," she said, her voice as smooth as riverstone. Each child was asked to sit with someone they hadn't spoken to that week and share one thing that made them feel calm. Keva hesitated and stood. Daniel leaned forward, breath caught. He walked over to Caleb, the quiet boy who rarely spoke, often stared out the window like he lived in another world. Keva knelt beside him, then slowly reached into her backpack and pulled out a foil. "No one should eat alone," she whispered, offering it. Caleb didn't respond, but he took it, and then cautiously he leaned his shoulder against hers. Inside the room, Clara's eyes brimmed. Inside the window, Daniel's did too. He turned away, pressing his palm to the cold hallway wall like he needed something solid to keep from breaking. His daughter, who hadn't touched or trusted or connected in years, had just chosen empathy over fear. That night, Daniel tucked Keva into bed as she clutched her stuffed rabbit, the one that still smelled faintly of Emily's perfume. "I gave Caleb a cookie," she said sleepily. Daniel brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "It was Connie," whispered. "It felt like me," she murmured. He nodded, unable to speak. When he left her room, he'd go to his office. He didn't open his laptop. He just sat in the hallway, head in his hands, and wept. For everything he had lost. For everything he was slowly, miraculously getting back. Chapter 3, Letters to Heaven. The mailbox was small, wooden, painted a soft, worn blue. It sat beneath the classroom's reading loft like a quiet invitation, with a handwritten sign above it that simply read, "Letters to someone we miss." Clara brought it in on a Thursday morning. No announcements, no fanfare. Just a juggled gesture placed near the window, where the light always fell like forgiveness. Some of the students had seen it before. Others stared at it like it held a secret. Clara knelt beside them and explained, her voice slow. "Sometimes we carry things in our hearts that feel too heavy to say out loud. This week, if you want to, you can write a letter. Not for grades, not to correct. Just..." Yokita sat near the corner, still and quiet. She didn't speak. He didn't move. But Clara saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers clutched the hem of her shirt. A storm was gathering, one she wasn't ready to name yet. So Clara didn't push. Instead, she simply glanced over with a soft nod that said, "You're safe here, even in your silence." That afternoon, while the other students painted or played soft cello on the classroom speakers, Keva reached for a sheet of pale pink stationery. She didn't rush. He held the pencil like it might break. Erased more than she kept. He paused between each line as though trying to speak across a great aching distance. It took her nearly an hour. When she was done, she folded the letter gently and walked up to Clara. Her voice was almost a whisper. "Can you send this?" Clara looked down, her heart tightening at the trembling in Keva's hands. "Where?" Curry pointed upward, toward the ceiling. You have been. Clara swallowed the lump in her throat and pressed a hand. I'll do my best. I nodded and walked away quiet. That evening, when the closet was empty and the sun bled across the windows, Clara sat behind her desk and unfolded the note. I put the weight. The blue didn't feel cold anymore. I sat next to Collop and gave him a cookie. He didn't talk, but I felt warm. Miss Clara said feelings were okay, even the sad ones. I still miss you. But today I wasn't scared. Clara's hands trembled as she held the paper to her chest. He didn't speak, didn't analyze, didn't explain. He just breathed slow, deep, and let the moment be. Later that night, Daniel found the note in Keva's backpack. She had forgotten to zip the pocket, and the pink paper peeked out like a secret trying to be heard. Keva, what's this? He asked gently. He didn't answer, just looked at him with wide, waiting eyes. Daniel read the letter, word by word. By the time he reached the end, his hands were shaking. He pulled the car to the side of the road and dropped his head against the steering wheel, letting the tears come. For 3 years he had buried everything. He buried Emily, buried his grief, buried Keva's pain under tutors and therapies in elite schools. But here, in 10 quiet lines on pink paper, was the truth. Keva was healing, not because of money, but because someone had listened. That night when he tucked her in, Keva whispered, "I gave Caleb a cookie." Daniel smiled through tears. "It was felt like me," she said again. And this time Daniel didn't hold back. "I miss her tea," he whispered, "so much." Kappa didn't speak, but she reached for his hand. For the first time, they grieved together. Chapter 4. The day Clara disappeared. Some storms arrive without thunder. They don't announce themselves in the sky. They begin with a whisper, a look, a presence that doesn't belong. That morning the classroom felt different. Even before Clara unlocked the door to room 203, her chest felt tight, a premonition she couldn't explain. The day began as usual. Morning circle, gratitude journal. Keva was smiling now, softly, subtly, a quiet glow in her eyes, like someone had relit the lantern inside her. Then came the interruption. The front office buzzed through the intercom. "Ms. Jennings, you have a visitor. She's on her way down the hall." Before Clara could ask who, the line went dead. He turned, confused, just in time to see a woman in pearls and pointed judgment sweep through the doorway like a verdict. Margaret Whitmore. Daniel's former mother-in-law, Emily's mother, and Keva's grandmother. Her eyes scanned the room with the precision of a scalpel, taking in the beanbags, the messy art wall, the feelings chart labeled tired/hopeful/quiet/brave. "So this is the safe space," Margaret said, voice laced with disdain. Clara stood to greet her, but Margaret raised a hand. "I'm not here for pleasantries. I'm here because my granddaughter has been sent into an emotional petting zoo." Clara kept her voice calm. "Mrs. Whitmore, if you'd like to speak privately." "No," Margaret snapped. "I want these children to hear what happens when authority is abandoned in favor of failing." Clara glanced at the wide eyes around. "Let's all take a break," she said softly to the children. "Find your quiet corners, your coloring bins. Miss Clara will be right there." But Keva didn't move. She stood, silent, her hand gripping the edge of the table. Margaret's eyes locked onto her. "Sweetheart," she said coldly, "your mother would be ashamed. This," she gestured to the classroom, "this is not education, it's indulgence." Clara's breath caught. She stepped forward. "It's enough." Margaret turned on her. "Who do you think you are?" she hissed. "You're not a therapist. You're not a parent. You're a glorified babysitter getting too comfortable in a role that was never yours." "You never tried to replace Emily," Clara said quietly. "No," Margaret's voice rose. "Then explain why my granddaughter says you make her feel safe. Why she says she wrote to her mother and wasn't afraid. You're manipulating her, and Daniel, and I won't let it continue. It happened all at once. Okima stepped between them, small, trembling, but fierce in her stillness. "Stop yelling at her," she cried. "She's the only one who listens. She's the only one who doesn't try to fix me." Margaret felt. So did Clara. "If I could choose a mom," Kiva whispered, voice shaking but clear, "I'd choose her." The room went silent. The other children watched from their corners. Clara's knees nearly gave way. Her hand went to her heart, unable to process what she'd just heard. And then Going appeared in the doorway. He had come early, bringing Keva's forgotten lunch. He'd heard everything. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, took Clara's hand, not in secrecy, not in shame, but in certainty. "That's enough, Margaret," he said. "This is our family now." But peace, like love, is never without cost. Later that night, Clara sat alone on her apartment floor, heart pounding. Margaret's words echoed in her mind. "You think you can replace my daughter?" "No, Clara, we had never tried to. We had only wanted to stay. But now she wasn't sure her presence was a gift or a disruption." Keva deserved stillness, and Danye had already lost too much. So she made the hardest choice of her life. She wrote a letter, folded it gently, left it on Daniel's doorstep before sunrise, then disappeared. The letter read, "Daniel, if my presence threatens Keva's peace, I'd rather disappear than take another safe place away from her. He has survived so much. He deserves stillness. Please tell her I never stopped caring, and I never will. Good Clara." Chapter 5. The letter she left behind. The envelope was pale cream, sealed with the kind of care people reserve for something they can't bear to say aloud. Daniel found it on his doorstep, half shadowed by the morning sun. He knew before opening it, knew by the way the air changed. Still, he stood frozen in the hallway, coffee cooling in his hand, heart racing like it was trying to outrun the truth. When he read Clara's words, his knees buckled. If my presence threatens Keva's peace. He had survived so much. He never stopped caring. He dropped to the floor. Not because Clara had left, but because she'd left without saying goodbye. Because she'd loved them enough to walk away. And that was the kind of love Daniel didn't know how to hold. Upstairs, Keva was brushing her teeth when he knocked on her door. She opened it, still in her pajamas, her eyes sleepy. He noted and held the letter out. "It's from Miss Clara." Keva's face lit up for a split second, then dimmed as she read the first line. "She left," she whispered. Dan could not wait, because someone told her she didn't belong. Keva's hands clenched the paper, the edges wrinkling beneath her fingers. She didn't cry, not right away. He just sat down on the floor, clutched to her chest, and stared at the spot where her art easel used to be. Daniel sat beside her, silent, hopeless. That night, Keva locked herself in her room. If she wouldn't eat, he wouldn't talk, he wouldn't open the door. Daniel sat outside, his back against the wall, just as he had after Emily died. "Baby," he said softly, "I know what it feels like to lose someone who brings light into a dark place." Silence. "I lost your mom, and I didn't fight hard enough to keep from losing Clara." A soft sniffle. "But I promise you, Keva, I won't let it happen again." The doorknob clicked. He stood in the hallway, her eyes red, holding Clara's letter in both hands like it was the last warm thing in the world. "Let's go find her," she whispered. Adil wrapped her in his arms. "Yes," he said. "Let's bring her home." It took 3 days. Clara had resigned without forwarding information. No number, no new school. But Daniel knew her heart, knew her rhythms. He started with the only place that made sense, a small community center on the east side, a place for children with trauma, funded by the city and forgotten by almost everyone else. And there she was, standing in the back of a dusty art room, helping a boy with autism paint a sun that had crooked rays and a bright blue smile. Her cardigan was flecked with acrylic. Her hair was tied up messily, There was a smudge of red across her wrist, and a look on her face he hadn't seen since. She looked tired, but calm. Kiva let go of Daniel's hand and walked forward alone. Clara didn't see them at first, then she turned. The little girl stopped just a few feet away and pulled something from her backpack. It was that first letter. The pink one. I saved it, Kiva whispered. For someone who could read it with the same heart. Clara took the paper with trembling fingers. Her eyes filled almost instantly. I never stopped thinking about you, she said. Then why did you leave? Clara dropped to her knees. Because I was scared I didn't belong. She got Kiva. Don't. Daniel stepped forward now. No flowers, no rehearsed speech. Just the quiet, weathered look of a man who had broken and rebuilt, and was ready to begin. I'm not here to ask for promises, he said. We're not perfect, but we're real, and we're waiting for you. Clara looked at him. Then at Kiva. And back at... She didn't need time. We didn't... We only needed to stop running. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she wrapped Kiva in her arms, then looked up at Daniel with a trembling smile. I want to come home, she said softly. Not to a job, not to a title, but to a life, to a family. That night they returned to the apartment. Okea curled beside Clara on the couch, listening to her read a bedtime story by candlelight. Daniel cooked dinner. Badly. But it didn't matter. Because the laughter was real. The healing was real. And Clara wasn't a teacher anymore. It was something far more sacred. It was home. Chapter 6. The Kirsty thread. Peace is fragile. Sometimes it feels like morning sunlight through curtains. Soft, sacred, and always one gust away from being torn open. For weeks, Clara lived in that morning light. She didn't move back into her old classroom. That role was never hers to reclaim. Instead, she spent afternoons helping Kiva paint emotions, build storybooks, and breathe through the grief that still crept in around bedtime. Daniel, for his part, softened too. He rescheduled meetings, turned off his phone at dinner, started learning the names of Kiva's stuffed animals. Some nights Clara would find him asleep on the floor beside her bed, one arm draped over her favorite blanket like a silent vow. I'm not leaving. It wasn't a perfect family, but it was there. Until one Thursday morning. The past knocked on the door in pearls and litigation. Margaret Whitmore. Imogen's mother. Ikeda's grandmother. A woman who grieved like it was a crown she alone had earned. He arrived with a lawyer, a thick manila envelope, and the sharp-edged smile of someone who believed she was right, even if it destroyed everyone else. Daniel opened the door. He didn't invite her in. Filing for full custody, Margaret said without emotion. I won't let that woman manipulate my granddaughter again. Daniel stared at her. Silutuk. Clara isn't manipulating anyone, he said. She's the reason Kiva smiles again. She's an unlicensed emotional liability, Margaret snapped. And your judgment, Daniel died. Those words hit like a slap. Clara, hearing the raised voices, stepped into the hallway. Margaret's gaze landed on her, not as a person, but a problem. Of course, she muttered, right on cue. Margaret, Clara said calmly, this isn't the place. No, Margaret replied, voice rising. The place is court, and I promise you, no judge in the state will award a grieving child to a man who's playing house with her teacher. That night, Kiva overheard everything. Daniel tried to keep her upstairs, tried to protect her from the tension, but children feel when the ground beneath them shifts. Clara found her sitting by the window, arms wrapped around her knees. Are you going to leave again? Kiva asked softly. Clara knelt beside her. Not unless you want me. But she said you're not my family. Clara took Kiva's hand and pressed it to her own heart. Do you feel like I'm your family? Kiva nodded, slowly, fiercely. And that's what mattered. The court filing came the next day. Daniel's attorneys advised him to create distance between Clara and Kiva during the proceedings. It looks better on paper, they said, even if it's not the truth. Daniel stared at the man across the table. You want me to pretend that the woman who saved my daughter's life doesn't belong in it? We want you to win custody, Mr. Ross. Daniel didn't answer, just stood and walked out of the office. That night he found Clara in the kitchen, washing dishes, humming a lullaby she'd once used to soothe Keva after a nightmare. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. They want me to cut you out of the picture until this blows. Clara froze. And will you? No, he said, because this isn't about winning. It's about protecting the only two people who brought my daughter, and me, back to life. The first custody hearing was quiet, cold, clinical. Margaret's lawyer painted Clara as a sentimental distraction, claiming that Daniel had made reckless emotional decisions that endangered Keva's stability. Then Keva asked to speak. The judge hesitated. She was only 8. But Keva stood, pink dress trembling with every breath, and held her ground. Mrs. Clara didn't make me sad, she said. She helped me find the words when I didn't have any. Do you know what this hearing is about? The judge asked gently. Keva nodded. It's about where I belong, and I belong where I feel safe. She looked at Daniel. Then Clara. And I feel safe with them. Outside the courtroom, Daniel knelt beside her. They were her. Uskapa smiled, and just told the truth. Clara held her hand. Daniel reached for the other, and between them stood a little girl who at once stopped speaking. Now teaching the world how to listen. Chapter 7, The Goodbye That Wasn't Goodbye. Clara had always believed goodbyes should be clean. No lingering looks, no open doors, just a quiet folding of the heart, and a prayer that the other person would carry only the softest parts of you forward. So when the judge adjourned the hearing without a final ruling requesting further investigation, Clara knew what came next. Distance, separation, silence for the sake of optics. Daniel's lawyers were blunt. Until the final hearing, we recommend limiting contact between Keva and Ms. Jennings. Any appearance of impropriety could hurt your chances. Clara didn't argue. She simply nodded, held Keva one last time that afternoon, and walked away before either of them could see her break. But it wasn't clean. That night, Daniel stood in Clara's doorway. He hadn't turned on the lights. The apartment was dark, save for the pale glow of street lamps filtering through gauzy curtains. Told me to leave, he said quietly. And I will. They said it's best if we pause, he added, until the ruling. Clara looked at him, eyes soft but steady. Then let's pause, not pretend. He stepped forward and touched his hand. A simple touch. But in it was everything. The weeks they'd spent learning how to breathe again, to hope again. And not walking away, Daniel, she whispered. I'm just stepping back, so you can protect the thing that matters most. You matter too, he said. Not more than Keva. There it was, the heartbeat of who she was. Not a woman looking to be chosen, but one who had already chosen them. For the next 11 days, Clara... She didn't text. He didn't call. He didn't send artwork home in Keva's backpack like she used to. But every morning Keva folded a drawing into an envelope, sealed it and whispered, "This is for her." Daniel kept them in a box. Quietly, reverently, a paper trail of love waiting for its return. On the 12th day, Margaret was confident, poised. She wore black like it was armor, and delivered rehearsed answers with the elegance of someone who never questioned her own righteousness. Daniel, on the other hand, wore fatigue. He barely slept, spent his nights memorizing every way Keva had changed since meeting Clara. The courtroom was quiet. The judge looked over her glossy. Mr. Ross, you've submitted testimony. We've heard from professionals and reviewed documentation. But I need to ask, why did you allow your daughter to develop such a bond with a non-family adult without legal clearance? Daniel stood. His voice was steady, but his hands shook. Because I was drowning, and Clara Jennings didn't just throw us a life raft, she taught us how to swim. He continued slowly. Keva had stopped smiling, stopped speaking, I gave her the best school, the best therapists, and none of it reached her. And Clara did. No, Daniel said. Clara didn't reach her. She waited for her. She let Keva come back on her own terms. He paused. I don't love Clara because she helped my daughter. I love her because she never asked to be loved. She just showed up, every day, gently, consistently, until Keva learned to feel safe again. The courtroom was still. Even Margaret didn't speak. That evening, Clara sat alone in her apartment, backing away children's books she couldn't bear to look at. There was a knock. He opened the door. She stood there, dress wrinkled, hair slightly crooked, a paper clutched in her hands. I told the judge the truth, she said. I said you helped me find my words. Behind her stood Danielle. No suit, just jeans, and tired eyes that softened the moment they met hers. We got custody, he said. That's wonderful, Clara replied, throat tight. But that's not why we're here. Ukeva stepped forward, handed her the envelope. Clara opened it. A single crayon dry-on. 3 people holding hands under a blue sky. In the corner, a heart with the word home. He welled up. I didn't say goodbye, Keva whispered, because I knew it wasn't one. Clara knelt and pulled her close. And Daniel, still in the doorway, took a step inside. Not just into her apartment, but into whatever came next. Chapter 8. The Girl Who Led the Circle. Room 203 was quieter than usual that Friday. The walls still held the same hand-painted signs. The beanbag still curved gently like familiar arms. But there was a hum in the air, an electricity that comes when something sacred is about to happen. Clara stood near the Feelings Today wall, arranging fresh name magnets. Behind her, Keva walked into the classroom holding something new. It was quiet, it was subtle, but it was there. And when Clara smiled at her, that warm, steady smile, Keva didn't look away. She smiled back. For months, Clara had gently guided Circle Time, a sacred space where children gathered to talk, reflect, and name what hurt or healed. Today, for the first time, Keva raised her hand. Clara's eyes met hers. She gave the tiniest nod. Would you like to lead? She asked softly. Keva hesitated, then stood. He walked to the center of the rug, not just taller, steadier. He went to ask a question today, she said, glancing around the circle. What's something that made you feel brave this week? A hush fell. Then, one by one, the children began to speak. I told my dad I miss him when he works late. I tried the climbing wall at recess. I asked for help when I felt dumb. Eva listened to each one, carefully, patiently. Then she spoke again. My break thing was telling the truth. Clara's heart caught. I told the judge that Miss Clara made me feel safe. I told my grandma that being quiet doesn't mean I'm broken. The children listened. What? Uva's voice shook, but she didn't stop it. I used to think feelings were scary, but now I think they're kind of like crayons. A few kids tilted their heads. Some are bright, some are dark, but they all belong in the box. Clara couldn't breathe. Because somewhere along the way, the girl who couldn't speak was now teaching others how to find their voice. After school, Daniel arrived early. He stood by the doorway as Keva and Clara sat on the floor, sorting through construction paper. She led the circle today, Clara said softly when he approached. Daniel looked down at his daughter, folding orange paper into a rough flower. Did you? He asked, crouching beside her. Keva nodded. He made the break box. Clara smiled, holding it up. A shoebox wrapped in blue tissue, with a slit cut in the top and a hand-drawn label. Things that made us bright. It was her idea, Clara said. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his throat tight. I don't think I've ever been proud of anyone in my life. Even more than building hospitals, Keva teased. He nodded, sighing. Even that night they sat together on the floor of the apartment. Clara read aloud from a picture book. Daniel grilled cheese, with more smoke than success. Keva painted a new picture, one she called hope. It was messy. Too much yellow. A sun with no edges. People with arms too long and hearts drawn on the outside of their chests. He showed it to Clara. "This is us," she said. "Because we stayed." And that was the moment. Not when a judge ruled. Not when custody was granted. Not even when Clara came back. The moment that mattered most. It was when a little girl led a circle of children who used to be quiet and gave them the words she once didn't have. Chapter 9. The Storm Before the Vows. The rain came just after midnight. Not soft or poetic, but relentless, the kind that smudges skylines and rattles windows, demanding to be noticed. But Daniel couldn't sleep. He stood at the apartment window, tie loosened, collar open, watching the city disappear behind sheets of rain. In the reflection, he saw the ring box in his hand, and no diamonds. Just a silver band Clara could wear when reading to Keva, when planting sunflowers, when pouring cocoa into mismatched mugs. He wasn't proposing to prove anything. He was proposing because for the first time in his life, love didn't need an agenda. But the storm had other plans. Clara wasn't answering her phone. It wasn't like her. Earlier that day, Daniel had dropped Keva at school, while Clara volunteered at the new Southfield Grief Center they were quietly building together. A space where children could heal, like Keva had. He was supposed to be home by 8. By 10, she still hadn't returned. At 11, Daniel called again. At 12, he got in the car. The roads were slick, the air dense with unease. By 12:17 a.m., he arrived at the center. The front door was cracked open. Inside, lights flickered. Rain dripped from the ceiling in soft taps. Clara sat alone on the floor of the children's reading quarter, knees pulled to her chest, head down. One hand rested on a worn file folder. Her hair clung to her cheeks, like autumn leaves to wet glass. Daniela approached. He looked up. Her eyes were red. "It's my son's birthday today," she said softly. Daniel froze. He had forgotten. She had never made it a scene, just mentioned him once gently. Nathan, a boy who loved dandelions and orange juice and was gone long before he should have been. "You don't have to say anything," Clara added quickly, brushing a tear. Daniel didn't speak. He knelt beside her, took her hand, and simply stayed. For nearly an hour they sat in silence, until Clara finally whispered, "I didn't think I could do this again. Love someone, be part of something that might break." "We're not perfect," Daniel said, his voice quiet. "But we're not broken either. We're in between, and sometimes that's where the real love lives." She rested her head on his shoulder. "Keva asked me last night what it feels like to be chosen." "What did you tell her?" "Real love choose once. It chooses every day." Daniel reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out the ring box. Clara looked at it. "I'm not asking you to marry me tonight," he said. "I'm asking you to come home. Again. Tomorrow. The next day. As long as it takes." Tears slid down her cheeks. "You always ask without force. Because you always give without asking." He opened the box. He held the ring to her heart. The next morning the sun broke through again, an apology. Bagiga danced in puddles outside Southfield Elementary, her backpack bouncing hair in two messy braids. Clara stood beside Daniel in the parking lot. "I didn't say yes yet," she teased. Daniel smiled, eyes on Keva. "You don't have to because when you came back the first time, we stopped being three people. We became a home." That afternoon, Keva asked if they could have a small family ceremony. No fancy dress, no guests, just the three of them. And so they did, in room 208, with streamers made from construction paper, a bouquet of dandelions, a single promise spoken aloud. "We choose each other, Every day, even in the storms. Chapter 10. The Wedding They Chose. It wasn't in a chapel. There were no pews, no string quartet, no floral archway flown in from France. But room 203 had everything that mattered. The treehouse loft wrapped in fairy lights. Handmade paper lanterns hanging from ceiling tiles. A rug cleared in the center, where children had once whispered secrets and shared sadness, now swept and waiting. Clara stood barefoot, in a soft white dress with pockets. Because she believed in comfort and carrying things. Daniel wore a pale blue shirt, sleeves rolled, no tie. Because today wasn't about formality. It was about presence. And Clara, bright-eyed and glowing in a yellow sundress, clutched the bouquet. Not of roses, but dandelion, just like Nathan once loved. The ceremony was small. Custom. In 3 folding chairs pushed against the wall. And a photo of Emily on the reading loft above. But to include. They didn't exchange vows written in fancy fonts. Instead, Daniel took Clara's hands. But you didn't heal my daughter with magic. You did it with stillness, with listening, with letting her feel safe for the first time in a long, long time. And you, Clara whispered back, taught me that broken people can still be loved, that it's okay to build something new, even with the pieces. Ukefa cleared her thought dramatically. And I now pronounce you Mom and Dad, she said, grinning. They laughed. Clara dropped to her knees. Daniel followed. Ukefa looped her arms around both their necks and pulled them in. You can kiss after the cookies, she declared. The celebration was simple. Music from a Bluetooth speaker. Chocolate chip cookies from a local bakery. A single candle they forgot to light, but no one minded. Daniel danced with Keva. Clara spun in socks across the scuffed linoleum floor. They didn't need approval. Or applause. Or a hashtag. They just needed this. The life they had chosen. The home they had built. And the family they had become, not by blood, not by plan, but by love. That night, as Clara tucked Keva into bed, the little girl looked up at her and asked, if we hadn't gone to the wrong school, would this still have happened? Clara pulled. Maybe not. It wasn't really a mistake, was it? Clara smiled. No, sweetheart, it was the beginning. In Quentin. They didn't need a mansion. They didn't need vows to prove they belonged to one another. They had enough laughter to drown out old grief. Enough ordinary days to build an extraordinary life. Clara never went back to teaching full-time. Instead, she co-founded a healing space with Daniel called The Quiet Place, a center for children like Keva, who carried invisible scars and needed gentler beginnings. Daniel still ran his company, but he no longer missed dinner. He no longer mistook performance for love. He was no longer afraid of Skilkedon. Because in the quiet, he had found them. School. He painted feelings with wild color. And once a month she left a new letter in the little wooden box labeled To Heaven, where she spoke to the mother she still missed. And the family she had now. Sometimes the most beautiful chapters in our lives begin with a misfiled school form. A woman who stayed just long enough to change everything. A little girl who found her voice, not because someone told her to speak, but because someone made it safe to feel. Love doesn't always look like a perfect proposal. Sometimes it looked like paper lanterns in a classroom. A man learning how to listen. And a woman who believed that healing didn't have to be loud to be real. Because the best kind of love doesn't fix you. It finds you. Gotten Guchaki where you. On a warm June afternoon, room 203 buzzed with excitement. Ukeva stood at the front of her 5th grade graduation, wearing a sunflower pin Clara had made just for her. He cleared his throat, held his paper with both hands. When I first came to Southfield, I didn't talk. I didn't laugh. He didn't know how to feel anything but sad. One day, someone sat beside me and didn't ask me to be okay. She just stayed. She looked down at Clara and Daniel in the front row. Clara's hand rested over Daniel's, tears shining in her eyes. "This is my family," Keva finished. "We didn't find each other the normal way, but we found each other, and that's enough." The crowd rose in applause. Outside, the sun painted streaks of gold across the sidewalk as Daniel lifted Keva into his arms and Clara joined them, all three laughing like they had never known silence. They had come full circle. With perfection, with presence, with love, with home. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who once thought they were too broken to be loved again. Because sometimes the thing that saves us isn't being fixed, but finally being under. Subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories for more tales that whisper, "You're not alone, you never were."